I've just come back from visiting Ernst Chain, and now it's 10:30 p.m. I'm feeling disgustingly cheerful too as a result of my visit. The main purpose of Chain, I may say, is that he works on penicillin. You remember, that stuff that is so active anti-streptococci and staphylococci that it almost brings people back to life? Apparently, it hasn't yet been crystallised after all. So far, all attempts have failed. I found myself irresistibly drawn to inject myself into the situation. Chain seemed quite keen to let me have some stuff to try to crystallise, and I'd simply love to try. Though, when I shall have the time, goodness knows. Lisbeth in my arms. She weighed £9 4 ounces this morning and has gained an average of 7.5 ounces per week in the first 8 weeks of her life.
So those were the words of not an academic. Those were the words of an academic, but not a contemporary one. Those were the words of Dorothy Hodgkin, who you can see up on the wall here. And those are very strong and direct words, partly the reason that we're focusing on her in terms of this promise and threats of science and technology, is that sentiment of penicillin as this new extraordinary drug that can almost bring people back to life gives the keynote to this whole exhibition. It's called Back from the Dead. It's being staged this year because it's 75 years since penicillin was first being administered to humans in a systematic way, just 5 minutes walk away in Oxford. Dorothy was not in the team that was producing and testing penicillin. She was going to be looking at the structure of this, injecting herself into the situation to try and study what this thing actually was. And her words there were very immediate. They're very, very direct, because that was a letter from her written at 10:30 at night to her husband. Her husband wasn't in Oxford. He was living and teaching in Staffordshire. And the fact that he wasn't there means that we have an incredibly rich and vivid window onto her life, because they swapped letters and postcards and little notes, and even you'll see telegrams, just to keep themselves informed of what was going on. So we do have a very intimate sense of her life, her aspirations, her scientific work, and her family. She also has retrospective views of the importance of penicillin and what it meant to be studying this in wartime Britain.
Going along South Parks Road one morning in May 1940, I met Ernst Chain in a state of great excitement. He'd just been carrying out the experiment which is now famous. They had 4 mice which they'd injected with Streptococcus alone, and 4 which they had injected with Streptococcus and penicillin. The first group all died, and the second group lived. Howard Florey, who led the project, had said, well, you don't need statistics to interpret that result. And as they were trying to isolate penicillin and find out what it was, Ernst was extremely excited and said, someday we will have crystals for you. Nobody who lived through the first year or two of the trials of penicillin in Oxford could possibly not care about what it was. It was wartime. A non-toxic, antibacterial agent that could treat infected wounds could save thousands of lives. If we knew its chemical formula, then chemists might be able to increase production by making it synthetically, instead of extracting it from the mould. But also it's difficult not to enjoy just growing the crystals. I began to like it as a child, and it's continued to be a pleasure.
So she gives a very strong sense there of what this meant, why it was such a significant piece of research to be involved in, and also this division of labour. She wasn't one of the people at the Dunn School of Pathology who was developing penicillin, growing it, extracting it, purifying it, testing it first on animals and then on humans. She was working on this next problem. How can you actually work out what it is? What's its structure? How are the atoms arranged? And what she's saying is, if I've got crystals, I can do something with that. And that's because she was an X-ray crystallographer, firing X-rays at crystals of biological molecules, taking photographs, and interpreting the scattered X-ray light that appears on the photographs. So X-rays, crystals are absolutely vital, and you might think, well, that's fine. How do you get crystals? Are crystals easy to get of tricky biological molecules? Not necessarily.
The new American penicillin was not in a state fit to work with when it came, but we followed instructions and recrystallised about a third of it, and by lunchtime had crystals larger than any we had ever had before. So now we're trying to go one better with the remainder and grow them overnight. I do hope it comes out well. Yesterday we got the second penicillin salt we wanted, and Barbara photographed it last night. It has come out very nicely and more or less just as wanted. So we can see weeks of work ahead, but work that really ought to produce results.
So part of the thing was you can get crystals, you take some pictures, and then you've got weeks of work. In fact, it was literally years of work. It took 3 years of work to interpret what this little molecule was. And what was that work? Well, nowadays you would do it with computers, and it might take you a day or less. This was done manually, with calculating devices and aids, with lots of drawing, iterating over and over and over again to work out how the atoms were arranged, and taking that sort of conjecture and then saying, yes, that would generate the pattern that we actually saw. So it was an incredibly labour-intensive piece of work, but it was one that did, as I say, eventually bring results in 1945.
When early in 1945 I told Bernal that I thought I'd found the structure of penicillin, he said, "You'll get the Nobel Prize for this." I said I'd far rather be elected a Fellow of the Royal Society. He said that would be more difficult. No woman had yet been elected, but changes were near.
They were near because she got both. She's still the only British woman to have won a Nobel Prize for Science, and she became an FRS, Fellow of the Royal Society. And that sense of the dramatic change, the enormous expectation that went against that type of success, is incredibly vividly revealed. And you have a sense of Dorothy Hodgkin as someone who knew what she was doing, that what she was doing had enormous significance, and that she also had a vision of the larger significance of science in the world. And you get a sense of that from one of the speeches that she gave when she went to Stockholm in order to receive the Nobel Prize, and this is the last of the little extracts that we have.
I was chosen to reply to the students here this evening as the one woman of the group. A position which I hope very much will not be so very uncommon in future that it will call for any comments or distinctions of this kind, as more and more women carry out research in the same way as men. I see all of you here, the hope of the world, the hope of getting the kind of world that we all want, and I should like to say, knowing my own children, that I think that this hope is very soundly based. I heard the news of my Nobel Award in Ghana, in the newly independent country where we are very conscious of the need for peace and progress. And we celebrated this Nobel Prize in my husband's Institute of African Studies with an enormous party and with dances danced by the students of music and drama. I made a speech there under the stars in Africa saying that never before was a Nobel Prize celebrated in this way. But I think I was quite wrong, for it seems to me that every year you celebrate Nobel Prizes with singing and dancing in Stockholm. And here too, you make this world, here and now, the kind of place that we all want to live in. Thank you very much.